Order. Order. Ian Byrne to move the motion.
I beg to move that this House has considered funding for children's hospices. It is a pleasure, as always, to serve under your chairship. To me and my family, Zoe's Place represents one word: family. They give me confidence to give my angel 10 years of a fantastic life and provided the most outstanding care when she passed away last year. Those are the words of Abby, mother of Evie Case, who relied upon Zoe's Place, a children's hospice in my constituency of Liverpool West Derby. Without Zoe's Place, Abby said, and the support, friends, families, and being able to visit my baby girl's plaque on her final day, I would be a broken woman. Another parent, Jennifer, mother of Theo, said, Zoe's Place means that Theo gets the love and care that he has at home. They have been amazing. I can't put into words how much we will miss the girls. The pure joy in Theo's face as we pull up and see the teddy bear. So yes to us, Zoe's Place is our family. Zoe's Place has been a massive support and a lifeline. Without Zoe's Place, we wouldn't have got Theo home from Alderley Hospital after being there for 12 months. And if I'm alone in finding Zoe's Place to be an absolute lifeline, if we had more time, I'd love to be able to tell you about countless other families and children supported by Zoe's Place. But, Chair, I applied for this debate today because earlier this month we received the shocking news that Zoe's Place was going to close. Jennifer spoke of her devastation and hearing the news. Abby said, please don't take this amazing place away. Zoe's Place opened in my constituency in 1995 and has supported thousands of children and their family members over the years, providing respite, palliative and end-of-life care for babies and children up to the age of 5. One of 2 wonderful children's hospices that my constituency is home to and which I am so proud of. The other is Clare's House, another place of love and warmth with the most wonderful staff who do so much good when families are facing such heartbreak. I see this firsthand when I volunteer at this wonderful place. Speaking to the families is something I find so enlightening on the absolute life-changing service they offer and give, and why we couldn't accept the news 3 weeks ago when it was announced that spiralling costs meant there wasn't enough money to build a planned new home for Zoe's Place.
Way on that point. Thank you. I thank the honourable member for giving way, and I congratulate him as well on securing a debate on such an important issue. He mentioned Clare House. That's in my constituency of Wirral West. It's an essential part of our health and social care system. And from my own visit there, you can see the clear passion and pride that people have in that service and the important work it does for my constituents. With integrated care board funding for children's hospices varying so significantly across England, does the honourable member agree that more must be done to ensure that every seriously ill child and their family, regardless of where they live, have equitable access to palliative care?
Thanks, my honourable friend, for that wonderful intervention, and I wholeheartedly agree with what Clare's House do and exactly what you just asked regarding the asks. So 3 weeks ago when it was announced that the spiralling costs meant there wasn't enough money to build a planned new home for Zoe's Place and that the baby hospice would close for good at the end of the year. So it was with real trepidation that we met with the trustees on the Thursday after the announcement was made. We entered Zoe's Place with the staff devastated, many who'd been there for decades, after being issued with the consultation period ahead of the planned closure. At the meeting, we were desperate to find a future for Zoe's Place, and the trustees and the staff present outlined what we needed. Raise £5 million in 30 days, and Zoe's Place potentially could have a future.
Would my good friend give way?
Of course.
I thank my good friend for giving way and congratulate him on securing this very important debate. But would my good friend join me in congratulating the wonderful community of Liverpool for the amazing work that it's done in securing nearly £5 million to secure Zoe's Place? However, would he join me in agreeing that instead of relying on charitable trusts to support these very important hospices, we need to think about how we put them on a statutory footing to provide better and end-of-life care for everybody?
Thank you to my honourable friend for that, again, excellent intervention, of which I wholeheartedly agree. So we had to raise £5 million in 30 days to give it a future. So I told the trustees to let us give it a shot. Harness the spirit of the city, who'd galvanised since they heard the news, and their love for this wonderful, wonderful institution. So we put the call out in Liverpool, and I've never seen a response like it in my life. It's been my great city at its very best for the world to see. Kids going door knocking with fundraising buckets, raising money because one of their friends is being supported by the hospice. Parents who turn to Zoe's Place in time of need, now organising fundraising walks and sponsored motorbike rides. MPs, like my honourable friend from Mason Harlington, promising to carry on playing his unique take on You Never Walk Alone on his trombone if he didn't raise the funds. Well, the city has spoken, John. I'm saying no more. Cafes pledging they're taking to the campaign and running raffles to raise money. Local business are getting involved and donating tens of thousands of pounds in their time and expertise, which will never be forgotten.
Well, my honourable friend give way. Yeah. I'd like to thank my honourable friend for giving way. And will he accept from me, on behalf of the people of Leeds who value Martin House Children's Hospice in Wetherby so highly, will he accept from me the congratulations of so many people in Leeds who will look to Liverpool with great admiration at the incredible fundraising efforts that have taken place? It really has impressed and inspired so many people, and also led people to the conclusion that we can't allow places like Zoe's Place to go to the wall, and therefore guaranteed proper full funding for palliative care and children's hospices is a must.
Thank you to my honourable friend for that, once again, excellent intervention, of which I wholeheartedly agree. So former football stars from Liverpool joined the efforts, donating over £150,000. The local paper, the Liverpool Echo, and its staff, led by Liam Thorpe, throwing their weight behind the campaign and doing everything they could to save the hospice. And on Monday, we had the incredible news that Home Bargain, a Liverpool-based company, was pledging £2.5 million to the campaign, bringing us within touching distance of the total. The tireless and wonderful work of so many has been invaluable over these last 3 weeks, and there's just so many to thank of you at the time. But I must pay tribute to the wonderful comic Adam Rowe and his fellow furry man Willie Miller, who've done so much to raise this issue both publicly and behind the scenes, and the Anfield rep John Gibbons for his tireless efforts over the last few weeks. There's still 10 days to go, and we're not over the line yet, but we've proven that if any city can do it, Liverpool can. The community, the solidarity, the togetherness. I've never been prouder to be a Scouser. And so today the plans for the future are coming together. Last week we announced what the new Zoe's Place Liverpool would be like. Operated and run in Liverpool, putting it on a footing to care for kids from across Liverpool and beyond for generations to come. I'm really optimistic we will do it. But the truth is, talk to the families who rely on Zoe's Place and Claire's House. See the support these hospices give to seriously ill children, their babies and families. And you will know that it isn't a luxury. It's essential in a modern, functioning society. It provides a vital service, and it should not require charity to keep it going. Everyone who needs it should have access to high-quality, palliative and end-of-life care. But at the moment, that's not happening. It's not just Zoe's Place in crisis. Children's hospices across the country are in crisis, with many more fearing for their future. And that is why today's debate is important to families up and down Britain. Despite children's hospices providing an essential service, they are overwhelmingly funded by charity. Less than a third of their income, around 30%, is public money, with the remaining 70% coming from charitable donations. It's a broken model. Let me be absolutely clear. I have the utmost respect for the people who give up their time and money to support our hospices. But as one constituent recently said to me, we shouldn't have to sell charity cupcakes to make sure kids are cared for. But that's what's happening at the moment. And the public funding element to children's hospices is both inadequate and messy. Most of it comes from the Children's Hospice Grant. Introduced by the last Labour government, this was designed to provide direct funding to children's hospices. Today, it stands as a £25 million grant, but it has an uncertain future. Renewed by the last government for 2024-2025, the new government hasn't yet said if this funding will continue. According to the charity Together for Short Lives, if this grant is not renewed, there will be a profoundly negative impact on lifeline care and support, with 82% of children's hospices telling the charity that they would have to cut or stop providing respite care or short breaks. 70% said they would have to cut or stop providing emotional and psychological support. and 45% of they have to cut the end-of-life care they provide. So I asked the Minister, will they commit to maintaining the £25 million Children's Hospice grant as a ring-fenced fund in 2025-2026, and also for the long term? And will they commit to making this grant centrally distributed once again, as many care homes have said to me that opposed to the integrated care board model the NHS England is currently using, which has led to delays in children's hospices receiving the money. The next biggest pot of public money for children's hospices comes from integrated care boards, which have a legal duty to commission palliative care, but this funding is patchy and failing. Research shows that the funding per child with a life-limiting or life-threatening condition varies wildly across the country, from just £30 per child in Northamptonshire to £397 in Bristol, North Somerset and South Gloucestershire. In my area, Cheshire and Merseyside, it's slightly above average at £206. There should be no postcode lottery in funding kids for care, and this funding is failing. Last financial year, children's hospices on average received almost 10% less funding than the year before, and almost a third less the year before that. So again, I asked the Minister, what is the government doing to make sure that every seriously ill child and their family, regardless of where they live, has fair and equal access to palliative care? Finally, local authorities have a duty to, and I quote, provide services designed to assist family carers of disabled children to continue to provide care, or do so more effectively by giving them breaks from caring. But local authorities, under immense pressure, account for just a small fraction of children's hospice public funding, around 2.5% of the total. It fell by 26% from last year to this year, with more than half of children's hospices receiving no funding at all from their local authorities. So once again, I asked the Minister, what conversations are they having with colleagues in the Department for Housing, Communities and Local Governments to ensure that local authorities meet their legal duty to provide short breaks for disabled children who have life-limiting or life-threatening conditions? These funding schemes are insufficient for children's hospices at the best of times, but now it really is crisis point, and that's why we're all here today. With public funding failing, charitable donations squeezed as the cost of living crisis bites, children's hospices have seen their income fall with increased energy prices and the cost of living crisis, which again is affecting us all, and this is having great consequences. More than half of children's hospices in England ended the last financial year with a net deficit, and it gets worse. Next year, more than 2/3 of children's hospices forecast a deficit. 2/3. Unless more public money is found, more and more children's hospices will have to cut back, more services will be reduced, more kids will miss out, more families will have nowhere to turn, and more children's hospices will be put at risk, just like Zoe's Place in Liverpool. Extra funding is needed just to stay still, let alone to build the world-class care system our constituents deserve. According to research from Together for Short Lives, the NHS needs almost £300 million extra to meet the standards for children's palliative care set by the National Institute for Health and Care Excellence. Chair, this is an inheritance of 14 years of Conservative chaos, of deeply damaging NHS reforms and chronic underfunding for our public services. Our new Labour government promised change, and that must be delivered. So I again ask the Minister, will they use the opportunity of the NHS 10-year plan to fill the almost £300 million gap in funding for children's palliative care? And let me remind everyone, there is money in this country to fund this. The problem we have is not the lack of wealth. The problem we have is the extreme unequal distribution of wealth. In the run-up to today's budget, I was one of the MPs who called on the Chancellor to raise taxes on the richest, with policies like a 2% wealth tax on assets over 10 million, raising 24 billion a year, enough to meet the palliative care funding gap 80 times over. That's why I introduced a private members bill that would launch a review of the funding for children's hospices yesterday, and I guarantee high quality care for all seriously ill children and their families. I really hope the Minister will take this call. I conclude with this. In Liverpool, the people have risen to the challenge, and we are on the cusp of saving Zoe's Place. Now this place has to rise to the challenge as well, and we have to give children's hospices the funding they need to survive. The children and families rely on these incredible institutions and they'll have time to waste. Thank you.
Can I remind members that they wish to speak to Bishop Bob, which I'm pleased to see. Can I say, the question is that the House has considered funding the children's hospices. Vicky Slade. That's quite a lot of speaking.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and I'd like to thank the honourable member for bringing this debate. Every time I meet a parent whose family is supported by a children's hospice, I'm immensely moved by their resilience. Like Gemma, whose 3-year-old son, Finley, has been cared by Julia's House for over 2 years. She wrote an incredible blog about parental mental health, which you can find on their Julia's House website. And in the debate about money, we should never forget that it's not only children whose lives that will be shortened, but parents whose capacity to follow their careers and support their wider family is curtailed. And siblings whose childhoods will look very different. So-called glass children. Those children who look strong on the outside, but are so fragile they could smash to 1,000 pieces. Children's hospices and other charities that support young carers and siblings like My Time Young Carers and Mosaic in Dorset deserve our unwavering support, and they should not have to rely on charity shops and crazy challenges to make ends meet, including this crazy MP who's agreed to do a crazy challenge for her children's hospice next year. My local children's hospice, Julia's House, is just half a mile from my home on the border of Broadstone and Corfmullen, and I've visited numerous times since it opened 20 years ago. It has one of the lowest public funding streams across the hospice sector, with only 8% of its funding coming from the NHS. But I had no idea that the support they provide for a child in the last 6 weeks of life is effectively unfunded. We expect the NHS to fund the birth of our children, but we're relying on charity to fund care at a child's death, and I find that shocking. When I visited on Monday this week, I was greeted by a nurse clutching her mobile phone. She showed me the rooms that were prepared for a family who were expected to arrive any time as their child was approaching the end of their life. The Mermaid Suite, which has been built to support a child's needs both before and after their death, was ready to welcome them, but I heard that the nurses would need to be available around the clock. They would receive no funding from the NHS, despite this releasing intensive hospital beds. The cost of end-of-life care was 3 times their usual per-child funding because of the needs of the medication and support at the end of life. And the hospice would have to take this money from the respite, sibling support and regular care programmes to make sure that that family could be given the choice they're entitled to under the NHS Gold Standard. One family who's been through this already is that of Annabelle with a genetically inherited condition. She was a frequent visitor to Julia's House, where she enjoyed respite stays, made friends, joined the hospice choir and even got to meet a member of her favourite pop band, the Vamps. She passed away earlier this year at the age of just 18, and her family now face the agonising prospect of losing Robbie to the same condition, where he is now receiving Julia's House care. But it's not just Robbie. Their other siblings are also receiving care and support through their counselling, and both parents benefit from the respite breaks that will then ultimately give them a chance of staying together. I dread to think what will happen to families like this if hospice services are cut back. The hospice grant hasn't been confirmed beyond 2025, and this needs to be guaranteed into the long term and cover every child that meets the threshold right up to the point of their death. In Dorset, we are 7 months into the year, and the contracts with the local health services have not yet been confirmed from NHS Dorset, NHS Wiltshire, Swindon and Baines. So I would like to ask that the Minister write to the ICBs and insist that they passport 100% of those grants to our precious children's hospices and commit to putting our children's hospices on a sustainable future. Thank you.
And Sean McWallen.
Mr Twigg, it's a pleasure to serve under your chairship. In my constituency, we are amazingly served by Shooting Star Chase Hospice, a children's hospice that serves 14 London boroughs across south-west and north-west London. Quite why that configuration exists, I am unsure, and boroughs and councils areas within Surrey. I calculate that is around 1.5 million people. And that service provides support to 544 children and their families. In essence, the funding crisis is because of the unique and specific services that hospice provides to those children and families, because no public body owns it. It is so dispersed that any integrated care board can simply ignore the tiny number of families that it serves. Every social services department in all those 14 London boroughs, all beset by huge problems of looking after children, will have a tiny number of children and families, so again, they can be ignored. That is why, in spite of a desire for everything to be brought down to the localist area, the local unit, in the case of children's hospices, there is a real and strong argument that we would like the Minister to hear about continuing the ring-fenced account for children's hospices. Because to bring it down is to take it to services already under pressure where the numbers are small and leverage is equally small. But there is always a cost to the breakdown in hospices and children's hospices. Because if a family cannot get the support to look after their child with a limiting condition at home, in the end, the NHS and social services will step in. So actually, in the long term and the round, and I appreciate that it is difficult for all governments or all shades to look that way, hospices are saving the public purse money because it's preventing the breakdown in those families, ensuring high standards of care, because few of us would ever argue that the best place for a child with a short life is at home, supported by the wonderful professionals that we have all met. So I would ask the Minister to support the continuing funding centrally of children's hospices, to look at what can be done for these services with the ICBs and social services departments in order to assure that they are held to account for the funding they have and how they allocate it. And given that there is the opportunity of a 10-year plan for the NHS, is it not time to make palliative care part of that consideration and that framework? Because unlike some members, I do think there is a role for volunteers in raising funds for shops. I have seen the value it gives to individuals in actually contributing. And I would say to my honourable friend that I'm sure his amazing constituents in Liverpool have all benefited greatly in what they've done to save his children's hospice. But it cannot be left just to the jeopardy and the ability of those volunteers. It needs the community and its government hand in hand to look after the most vulnerable children in our country.
Just before I call the next speaker, if, as the precedent has been set so far well, if you can keep your speeches to not more than 4 minutes, I won't have to impose a time limit at this stage, and that includes obviously interventions will extend that. So Bradley, Tom.
Thank you. It is a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, Mr Twigg, and I wish to thank the member for Liverpool West Derby on securing this debate and talking about his moving story. I know that all of us will be united in our support for hospices across the country. I'm speaking in this debate to support Acorns in particular. They're a children's hospice serving the West Midlands. They are headquartered in my constituency. They serve wider Worcestershire but also the wider West Midlands region. Established in 1988, Acorns Children's Hospice has delivered the essential care that hundreds of local children have needed for the past 36 years. And without it, many families would have been left with nowhere else to turn. When the unimaginable happens and a child receives a devastating diagnosis, Acorns Children's Hospice has always been there to help. They provide lifelong supportive care for children with life-limiting and life-threatening conditions across the West Midlands and Gloucester from 3 hospices based in Birmingham, Worcester and Walsall, and out in the community and in family homes. They help children and families fill the time that they have together with love, fun and laughter, creating lasting memories, all while providing tailored care to meet each child's individual medical, emotional, cultural, religious and spiritual needs. And I would particularly like to put on record my thanks to all of the staff and volunteers at Acorns for their compassionate dedication to the care that they provide. More families than ever need our vital children's hospice care, and that number is expected to continue growing. However, now for the first time in its history, Acorns is facing the prospect of turning away a child in need. The Children's Hospice Grant has existed since 2007 and aims to provide some of the funding required for children's hospices across England. In 2019, NHS England increased the Children's Hospice Grant to £25 million per year for 2023-24 and ring-fenced this money specifically for children's hospices. However, this funding is no longer certain under the current government. I therefore join the call and join Acorns Children's Hospice in urging the Minister to protect and maintain the Children's Hospice Grant as a directly distributed ring-fence grant so that Acorns and every children's hospice in England can continue to provide the care that children and families desperately need. To give Acorns and local families the assurances that we need, the government must also guarantee this children's hospice grant for at least 5 years and increase it by at least the rate of inflation each year. By guaranteeing this core funding, it will allow Acorns and hospices across the country to continue to be there for every child and family who need their vital support.
Thank you,
Mr. Twigg, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. And I want to thank the Honourable Member for Liverpool West Derby for getting this debate. Mrs. Twigg, I don't as such have any children's hospices in my constituency of Bolton South and Walkden. We do have Bolton Hospice, which is a brilliantly run organisation serving the people really well for the adults. However, there is the Francis Children's Hospice, which serves the Greater Manchester area, and some of the children from Bolton would have been there. I'm not going to try to repeat everything that everyone has already said, except to raise a few very salient points. Firstly, when we see a loved one being unwell and suffering, it's incredibly painful. But when you see a child suffering, I think all of us can agree that the pain is even more acute and more severe and more worse when a child and a young person is reaching the end of their lives. And let's remember what hospices are there for. They're there for children, young people, and of course in the adult hospices for people who are actually going to be dying. That will be their last few months, few weeks. And surely for a kind, decent society, we should be able to provide them the best service possible for the last few weeks or months in this world. Therefore, I do think that there should be, and should have always been, a central provision for palliative care across the whole of the United Kingdom. And it should never have been a situation where it's left to local authorities, integrated care board, charities, voluntary sector, and all the different people who can contribute in. And it's great. And I agree with my honourable colleague for Mitcham and Morden, who said that of course we're all for volunteers and everyone. And I want to pay particular tribute to the people of Liverpool for rallying around and being able to get money for the hospice. But really, we shouldn't have to be relying on that. We should have, and I believe it's about £285 million, which could provide proper facilities for everyone across the UK so that hospices can plan properly. We know with the rise of the living standard expenses, we know the fact that we need experienced, skilled people. If the hospices know that they have a regular funding coming, then they can plan for things properly as well. And it's not a case of, oh gosh, yes, we've got a bit of money this month and we can use it for this facility. it should be the case. They should be able to plan for the whole year or years to come. And therefore, and I know that the Minister, and I congratulate him on his position, and I know he's going to be having many such issues to deal with, but I would ask, as my other colleagues have already said, that in the 10-year NHS review plan, please think about palliative care and make it a national plan so that it's given to everyone across the whole of the United Kingdom.
Shannon.
Liverpool West Derby for setting the scene. It's nice to see him in his place, and used to be over here, now he's over there, so he's been elevated. Well done. Can I just say how saddened I was to hear about the closure of Zoe's place in the members' constituency to a standalone charity to encourage investment. There are so many children who avail of these services, so it's never nice to hear of the news that the honourable gentleman has presented today. Our hospices are pivotal within the local community, so it's great to be here to discuss how we can support them further. I also say it's a pleasure to see the Minister in his place. Look forward to his contribution, and the Shadow Minister as well. About a fortnight ago, I attended, Mr Chairman, the pop-up hospice charity shop here in Parliament, and it was indeed helpful to discuss the funding crisis facing our hospices with other members and representatives. And I also signed an open letter to the Minister of State for Care, excuse me, and look forward to hearing his responses in relation to these issues. Over the years, Mr Chairman, I've supported Children's Hospice for all their charitable events. We have maybe 3 or 4 charitable events in my constituency of Strangford every year. People are very generous and incredibly kind, and the monies that John and Anne Calvert, who do those charity events, are something that we all appreciate. And just to give background on the Northern Ireland situation, Mr Chairman, the Northern Ireland Children's Hospice is instrumental in providing endless amounts of support for people. They're incredibly helpful. Horizon House in Newton Abbey is a 7-bed inpatient centre for starts, but the hospice also aids within the local community. This includes sibling and bereavement support. It goes beyond what would normally be thought to be the case. Community care alongside hospice at home. And palliative care, Mr Chairman, for 350 babies across Northern Ireland, really, really, really important. In February of this year, due to a decrease in government funding, the hospice had to reduce its bed capacity to 6, with the intention of running 6 beds Monday to Friday and 3 beds Saturday and Sunday, a drastic change from the 7 beds, 7 nights model. Fundraisers who are incredibly active added a huge £14 million to the 4 hospice care facilities back home. Oh, happy to, yeah.
Member for giving me would agree with me that it's a fundamental point he's raising about the issue of the community that raises millions of pounds to support hospices, particularly palliative care and across society, but that has to be seen not as a replacement for government funding, but in addition to it.
Yeah. I thank my honourable friend for his role in that intervention. He's absolutely right. The £14 million that they've raised in Northern Ireland for the hospice care is extra money, and government, and I say this very gently to the ministers and those in positions of power, that shouldn't be taken as well, we can take £14 million off what they're doing in Northern Ireland because they've got £14 million from the voluntary service. That £14 million is vital to ensure that it goes forward. The increasing reports of closures and decrease in some services, there's a clear need for the Department of Health, wholly supported by the Barnett Consequential, to find ways to financially aid our hospice services so that years down the line we don't see impending closures. The core priority, I believe, Mr Chairman, is to protect these vital services that provide so much to families across the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Together for Short Lives has revealed that Northern Ireland's Children's Hospice has a forecasted budget deficit this year of 1.46 billion in 23-24. This is due in part to a 6% cut in the Children's Hospice statutory income. Our hearts and most important, our thanks are for the staff of hospice centres who work tirelessly to support these young children and families through the end of life palliative care. So I conclude with this, Mr Chairman, and trying to keep to your time. I strongly sympathise with the member for Liverpool West Derby and what his constituents are going through. So I have every hope that government and this government can do to support the devolved nations and indeed NHS England in terms of the funding crisis. It is responsible of the DUH back home, but it must be fully supported by Westminster right here. Thanks so much.
G. Bergen. John McDonough.
Right. Okay. Can I sub Can I congratulate the honourable member for my honourable friend for West Derby, not just for securing this debate, but the work he's undertaken over the last couple of months or so on raising the funds for Zoe's place. What the honourable gentleman did, he rounded up every Scouser he knew, including those of us who live in exile, and asked them to in some way contribute. My contribution he made reference to was to do a rendition of You'll Never Walk Alone on the trombone. Oh dear, I agree. Let's be charitable about this. The way in that video was used was that if you don't pay the money, you'll keep on playing. And my brother Brian contacted me as an ardent Liverpool supporter, said, "Why were you playing Three Blind Mice?" This man has raised the money nearly, but I want the message to go out there, we're not yet over the line, and we need it for such a valuable resource. I also want to congratulate my honourable friend for Mitchell and Morden for the work that she's done on the all-party group on palliative care for children. Her and Lord Balth met with the Minister, and I believe it was a really helpful ministerial meeting that took place. And I want to reiterate just the demands that she made there, the request that she made there for the Minister. The idea of at least extending the 25 million is absolutely key, making sure that's ring-fenced for this coming period. It's not that we don't trust the ICBs. Eventually, we'll get into action, we'll be geared up. But if the money goes directly to them, actually we'll be competing amongst other priorities, and it'll be very difficult to see how that can be maintained and secure for the future. There has been another petition that's been raised as well by Colin Dalby, I think the person's name is, that wrote to me, and that's about calling upon the money that's raised in fines by the Financial Conduct Authority, 100 million of that to be transferred for hospice funding. I actually think that's worth looking at as a short-term gap for the coming period. But the long-term issue is exactly as my friend Mitchell Morden said, we need a comprehensive plan. We accept it could be a 10-year plan. People just want the security over that time. I want to see that integrated into government funding, of course, with charities raising funds for additional funds, but I think it has to be core funding overall. I want to raise just one final point, which is I chair a group of unpaid carers, and I've done so for the last 2 years. If you're in unpaid care in this country at the moment, you're looking after someone sick, or you're looking after a child that has been a terminal diagnosis, it almost certainly thrusts you on the edge of poverty because the carers allowance is so little, and it causes untold worry and stress for those parents that is unnecessary. So I put a plea in, and we'll see what happens in the budget today. I'm hoping that the government will address the carers allowance. It means a dramatic uplift, and in that way it will help alleviate some of the stress and pressures that are placed upon parents looking after children with a terminal diagnosis.
James McCleary.
And thank you to the member for Liverpool West Derby for bringing this debate forward today. As a parent myself of 2 young children, I frankly live in awe of the strength that parents with children with life-limiting conditions show. I think it's incumbent upon all of us to ensure that the funding and support is there so that those parents can enjoy those precious years that they're going to have with their children, those moments of joy that sometimes perhaps some of us take for granted with our own children. These families face immense challenges, yet the support they receive varies drastically depending on where they live. And the postcode lottery they face is simply unacceptable. Sussex, where my constituency of Lewis is located, with its population of nearly 442,500 children, has an estimated 2,980 children living with life-limiting conditions. This means that approximately 67 out of every 10,000 children in Sussex require specialist palliative care. These children and families deserve consistent, high-quality care, but sadly this isn't always the reality. A report from the campaign Together for Short Lives has revealed that Sussex is failing to meet its required standard for 24/7 end-of-life care at home. This means that families in Sussex are less likely to have access to around-the-clock nursing care and specialist advice when their child needs it most. It's hard to imagine the additional stress and heartbreak this inflicts on families already coping with the unimaginable. This situation is not, sadly, unique to Sussex. The report highlights that only a third of local areas in England meet the required standards for 24/7 end-of-life care. This points to a systemic problem, a lack of funding, workforce shortages and a lack of accountability for delivering equitable care across the UK. I want to see a roadmap for change, Mr Chairman. Increased funding is essential to close the gap in the NHS spending on children's palliative care. We need more specialised nurses and paediatricians trained in this field. And most importantly, we need to hold our local NHS and local councils accountable for implementing existing policies that some other members already mentioned, and ensuring that every child in Sussex and in the rest of the country, regardless of their postcode, has access to the care they need. I hope that we'll see some good news in the Chancellor's budget statement later this morning to close the funding gap for children's palliative care. But this isn't just about statistics, it's about real families facing real challenges. We must act now to end this postcode lottery. Children with life-limiting conditions deserve the best palliative care. Thank you.
Wendy Morton.
Thank you, Mr Twigg, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship today. And I pay tribute to the member for Liverpool West Derby for bringing forward this debate today. I think we would all agree that children's hospices do absolutely amazing work. Hospices such as Acorns in Walsall, which I know is a lifeline to families in my constituency. And much of their work goes unnoticed by many, but not to those who rely upon their services, the children, the families, the siblings. And with that in mind, I would just like to pay tribute to Councillor Kerry Murphy, who at a recent meeting at Walsall Council gave an incredibly moving and emotional speech in which she touched on her own personal experience as a carer, a mum and a wife, and who relied upon the services of Acorns Hospice. But whether it's accessing short breaks for respite, help for accessing the right services or support through the loss of a child, children's hospices are a crucial source of support for seriously ill children and their families. It costs around £11 million every year for Acorns to run their care services, and only a small percentage of this is funded by government, and it currently comes through NHS England. Children's hospices, as we've heard this morning, are left increasingly reliant, Mr Twigg, on their charitable income and reserves to provide that vital care and support. It's thanks to the commitment, determination and ingenuity of the Acorns team that they have increased their fundraising efforts through a whole programme of activities, including their shop in Aldridge. But it's not sustainable to expect such a reliance to continue. If the government fails to maintain the £25 million existing NHS England funding for the children's hospice sector, it is families and children that will suffer. They will miss out on the extraordinary care and support that they need and rely upon. Their child will miss out, their siblings will miss out. And I really fear if this funding issue is not properly addressed, as we've heard this morning, our hospices will be faced with some of the toughest decisions that none of us would like them to have to face. This cannot be right. We have a responsibility to the sector. The sector needs clarity and it needs commitment from the Minister, which I hope we will get today. They need certainty of sustainable funding, starting with a return to NHS England distributing the grants centrally in 25-26. With care costs growing rapidly, the £25 million must be maintained, but it also must be increased. A further point I'd like to make is on the role of the ICBs. We know that the ICB funding for children's hospices is patchy and variable. We know it's nowhere near the level that is really needed. There needs to be greater accountability and greater transparency. So I'd urge the Minister to listen to the hospice sector, recognise that their funding is for the strong preferences of it to go through NHS England. So I'm conscious of time, but I just urge the Minister to listen to us, to maintain the budget, to ring-fence it, centrally distribute it beyond 24-25, and with increases at least by the rate of inflation. Thank you.
Tim Farron.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Pleasure to serve under your guidance today, and I really would want to pay tribute to the Honourable Member for Liverpool West Derby for bringing this important debate to this place at this time, but also for making astonishingly good use of one of these debates. There's no doubt whatsoever that Zoe's place and the fundraising appeal will have been materially benefited by him putting this issue before this place, and therefore the country, his community, and I pay tribute to his community for their generosity. I speak as somebody on behalf of the Children's Jigsaw, serving Cumbria, North Lancashire and the southwest of Scotland as well. Also Derrien House in Chorley, which serves some of my constituents as well. The scale of the heartbreaking reality of young people living with life-limiting conditions is mind-blowing. And nobody could really be failed to be moved by that reality and the impact upon those families. It's worth also bearing in mind the immense compassion and professionalism that is demonstrated at Jigsaw and indeed all of our hospices. I think it's true to say that there is a value in the hospice movement having that independence, that charitable status. I think they value it, but there is a limit. And what we're looking at today is hospices, in particular children's hospices, stretch beyond that limit, their ability to raise the funds they need to take care of the very poorly children that they lovingly and so professionally do take care of. The scale of this is worth bearing in mind. In the ICB that covers the southern part of my constituency, Lancashire and South Cumbria, there are currently nearly 3,500 people aged 0 to 24 with life-limiting or life-threatening conditions. In North Cumbria, which obviously includes the whole of the north east of England as well, that figure is more than 6,000. And if you look at the amount of money therefore spent per head, that's £18.86 per child. If you think about the hospice movement as a whole serving Cumbria, so St Mary's at Ulverston, St John's at Lancaster, Derrien House, but also Eden Valley Hospice and Jigsaw, we're talking about the taxpayer, if you like, the NHS being saved £33 million every single year because of the support they give in terms of providing palliative and end-of-life care for people of all ages. But the particular thing I want to raise about Jigsaw and the threat that they face, they're a relatively small children's hospice serving a very large rural county. My honourable friend behind me, Strangford, talked about the importance of hospice at home, for example. The support they give to families outside of the hospice is also massively important. But the impact on fundraising recent years has been, of course, inflation. And you look at the energy bill, something like a 30% increase in overheads for most children's hospices, including Jigsaw. And the fact that, of course, hospices need to and want to compete with the NHS for the pay that they give their excellent staff. But they're not funded. When the NHS has a pay rise, then each part of the NHS, generally speaking, gets the funding in order to cover it, not children's hospices. And so we are calling for the ring fencing and the central distribution of the money to hospices, and for increases if at all possible. A particular word about the complexity of our communities. I don't want to overly criticise our ICBs, but we have a children's hospice which serves 2. And as a result, getting the money out of them can be very, very, very difficult. It shouldn't be for children's hospices to work so tirelessly to drag money out of the public sector, to raise so much from voluntary services, when what they're trying to do is provide compassionate, professional end-of-life care for our children. It's time today that the Chancellor steps up and funds our hospices, including Jigsaw, in a way which is permanent, reliable and sufficient.
Yeah.
Mohammed.
Thank you, Mr. Twigg. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and I thank my honourable member for Liverpool West Derby for securing this important debate. So, in preparing for this debate, I learnt that over half of children's hospices around the UK reported a deficit in 2023-24 as a result of the long-term and sustainable statutory funding, as a result of a lack of long-term and sustainable statutory funding, and coupled with increasing costs incurred when providing lifeline care to seriously ill children and their families. Over half of children's hospices in England ended the year in deficit. Looking ahead to 2024 and 25, the picture gets even worse, with nearly 3/4 of children's hospitals forecasting a net deficit, with a total shortfall across 35 organisations estimated to reach 25 million. In Kirklees, which is where my constituency sits, Forget-Me-Not Children's Hospice is an essential part of our local health and care system. They offer vital palliative care and support to seriously ill children and their families. Despite this, however, the hospice is facing a turning point. Crucial services, including respite and end-of-life care, will be cut if the government fails to maintain the existing £25 million NHS grant funding for children's hospices. For Forget-Me-Not, the impact of losing this grant would be catastrophic and would result in a significant reduction in services in our area. This on top of already fragile sustainability as a result of historic underfunding, making it one of the lowest funded hospices in the UK. Amid a year of high inflation and growing costs of recruiting and retaining skilled and experienced staff, children's hospices costs are rising. UK government ministers must act to urgently ensure seriously ill children and their families can access the crucial hospice and palliative care services they need. And I stand here and join my honourable friends to ask the Minister to maintain the £25 million as ring-fenced, centrally distributed NHS funding for children's hospices beyond 2025 and ensure this funding increases by at least the rate of inflation. I also ask the Minister to use the new 10-year plan for England to review the way in which children's palliative care is planned and funded and ensure that these vital, critical services are funded in full and not left to rely on community fundraising.
Zoe Franklin.
Thank you, Mr. Trigg. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. And I want to start by thanking the Honourable Member for Liverpool, West and Derby for organising this very important debate on the funding of children's hospices. I have had the sobering privilege of visiting Christopher's Children's Hospice, run by Shooting Star Chase, just beyond the border of my constituency of Guildford, on 2 occasions in the past year, and each of those visits has left me with a lasting impression as I've witnessed the incredible work the dedicated staff team do to support children in my constituency and well beyond who have life-threatening conditions, but also, of course, their families. So my reasons for speaking today, just as so many others have done so, is to highlight how challenging the financial situation that hospices are experiencing has actually become. We've heard that only 1/3 of the funding required by hospices comes from the NHS and central government, and the rest is sourced from charitable donations. We are really fortunate to live in a society where fundraising for children's hospitals is able to keep them funded. But is this really how we should be providing the majority of funding for crucial services for children with life-limiting and life-threatening conditions? The £25 million allocated by NHS England is intended to support children's hospices, but the distribution through ICBs has led to significant delays and accessing this funding for the upcoming 2024-25 financial year. And there is a really troubling uncertainty regarding whether this funding will continue in 25-26 and beyond. And this only exacerbates the already daunting task of financial planning for hospices. Given these circumstances, but it is perhaps not surprising that in a recent survey of children's hospices, we found, Together for Short Lives found that actually hospices would prefer NHS England funding to be distributed centrally. And actually that was an overwhelming 83% of respondents, because it will provide certainty and stability that is crucial to them. I'm sure everyone here can all agree that children's hospices play a vital role in our communities. And I just want to put on record today a really, really big, heartfelt thanks for the care that hospices and their honestly incredible staff provide to children and their families, and in particular for my own local residents and across Surrey and beyond, Christopher's in Shalford. These families and the children are going through some of the toughest challenges imaginable. But our gratitude is not enough. And I really want to urge the Minister today to commit to a fair, long-term deal on funding for children's hospices and to ensure that the NHS funding returns to being a centrally managed grant. Thank you, Mr. Trigg.
Joshua Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr. Trigg. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. And I want to thank the Honourable Member for Liverpool West Derby for bringing this important debate. Children's hospices provide an essential service, offering specialised care for those children with life-limiting and life-threatening conditions. But they're not just a place of medical care. They're sanctuaries for love, of comfort, of dignity. They ensure that every child can experience joy and the best possible quality of life. But like many institutions in the UK, children's hospices have been struggling over the past few years. In 23-24, children's hospices spent 15% more than they did in 21-22, whilst receiving 31% less funding from the ICBs and 11% less from local authorities. Compounding that fact is the fact that since 2019-2020, there's been a 41% increase in the number of children receiving end-of-life care in hospices. Alexander Devine Children's Hospice in Maidenhead is a shining example of children's hospices. In November 2021, Alexander was diagnosed with a brain tumour at the age of 4. At that point, his whole family became consumed by hospital appointments, by doctors, by nurses, by operations, by treatments, by scans. 4.5 years later, Alexander sadly died, aged 8. The Devine family knew at that point that it was clear that Berkshire needed its own children's hospice. And this children's hospice has become a lifeline for countless families across Berkshire, bringing together the community and bringing together the community's compassion. The impact Alexander Devine Children's Hospice has on the community is profound. In the last year, the hospice provided over 18,000 hours of care and support to families. It's not just a statistic for families, but it's countless moments of relief, moments of joy, and precious family memories created by the hospice, all of which have got challenging lives. But that's set against the backdrop that 83% of their funding comes from donations, fundraising and gifts in wills. And the reliance on charitable contributions underscores the precarious nature of funding in this area. We understand that children's hospices are not luxuries, but they're necessities, and they fill a critical gap in our healthcare system. But to do that, we need to fund them properly. I'm not going to repeat the calls that every other speaker has made on the Minister today, but I think it's clear that we need to see what movement we're going to get forward, and I'm really hopeful that we'll see our wishes from today reflected in the budget later. I finally wanted to close by reflecting on the words of Fiona and John Devine. The word hospice is not a word that many relate with happy thoughts. I much prefer the Latin, a resting place on life's journey. And I know from experience that you cannot go into a children's hospice and not be filled instantly with love, laughter, happiness and tears. Thank you.
Can I first of all thank members for the cooperation in terms of the time taken for the speeches. Just to the front bench to say that I would be very keen that the Honourable Member for West Derby, Liverpool West Derby, gets a chance to wind up at the end for a minute or so. So to call the first front bench spokesman, can I call Alison Bennett?
Thank you, Mr Twigg, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship this morning. And I would like to begin by thanking the Honourable Member for Liverpool West Derby for bringing this really important and timely debate. And I'd like to pay credit to his efforts and the efforts of the good people of Liverpool in all the work they've done to hopefully save Zoe's place. But of course, the fact that all those efforts and the trombone playing have been required shouldn't really be where we're at today. And I think there's widespread agreement based on the contributions of members on all sides of the chamber this morning that actually this total dependence on fundraising and putting out the begging bowl to keep children's hospices going is unacceptable and something we would like to see change. In terms of Sussex and Mid-Sussex, where I live, I know somebody called Carey. I first met him in 2019 and I went to his house for a cup of tea and he pointed to a photograph on the wall and he said, just so you know, this is my son Fred, and Fred died when he was a teenager. Roll on to 2024 and Carey and I are no longer fellow constituents. He lives just outside Mid-Sussex. But we're both served by the wonderful Chestnut Tree House Hospice in Arundel that serves families right across West Sussex. And the Chestnut Tree House did an incredible job for Carey and for Fred and for the whole of their family as Fred was approaching the end of his life. and Carey said that he is certain of the fact that without the support of Chestnut Tree House, our lovely Fred, and for us, as we helped him on his journey from lively teenager to death, we would all have been broken beyond endurance. So what the Chestnut Tree House did for Carey was make his and his family's most difficult years as bearable and as happy as they could be. Every child whose years are shortened and every family involved deserves this support. I fear that unless the government takes decisive action, these vital support services will continue to wither, and children like Fred and family members like Carey will be left to fend for themselves in truly dark times. This is not an issue to be addressed at a later date. This is an issue having consequences for children and families around the country today. The challenges faced by children's hospices are daunting. Each year, hospices across the UK provide vital services to around 300,000 people, including approximately 7,500 children with life-limiting or life-threatening conditions. This is why we Liberal Democrats firmly believe in the necessity of a fair funding deal for hospices. It is time to address the inconsistencies members have spoken about in children's palliative care funding and ensure that all hospices are properly resourced to meet even the most basic NHS standards. Charities such as Together for Short Lives have identified systemic problems that are stopping children getting the care they need. With the large majority of funding being private or charitable, the sector is precariously poised. And while the increase in the Children and Young People's Hospice grant to £25 million is a positive step, I'm sad to say it falls woefully short of the £295 million gap identified by charities like Together for Short Lives in NHS spending on children's palliative care. A staggering two-thirds of local areas in England fail to meet the required standard for 24/7 end-of-life care for children at home. And alarmingly, only 14% of integrated care boards, just 6 in total, are currently funding services that provide round-the-clock access to children's nursing care and specialist paediatric palliative care consultations. The postcode lottery is very real. In 2022, NHS funding for children's hospices varied dramatically. Some areas, like Norfolk and Waveney, allocated £511 per patient. Others, such as South Yorkshire, provided a mere £28. This disparity is totally unfair. It leads to unequal access to essential services, including therapies like physiotherapy, which can make genuinely life-changing differences for so many children. And these are, of course, not just statistics. They translate into real-life consequences for families who need and deserve every bit of support they can get. Meanwhile, rising costs have not been matched by appropriate funding increases. The lack of transparency in funding and services is concerning. Freedom of information requests have revealed that only 31% of integrated care boards could confirm how many children with life-limiting conditions accessed hospice care in their area. 14% couldn't even report on their spending in this critical area. This is unacceptable. We must have a clear understanding of the needs in our communities to ensure that no child is left behind. We cannot allow our most vulnerable children and their families to be at the mercy of a fragmented and inadequate system. I believe we have a moral obligation to act, and together we can create a future where every child, regardless of their circumstances or where they live, receives the best possible palliative care. This can happen when, firstly, the government fixes the postcode lottery. Secondly, the government reviews the declining charitable incomes of hospices and the links they have to deteriorating services. Thirdly, the government reviews commissioning for palliative care, which too frequently leaves hospices out of pocket for providing basic services and which leads to significant disparities within and between communities. And finally, the government introduces a specific national hospice workforce plan to cut vacancy rates with utmost urgency. In closing, it is vital that the government commits to this action, to ensure that every child whose years are shortened and every family involved can make the most of every moment that they have left together, just as Fred, Carey and the rest of the family were able to do. Thank you.
Well, the opposition spokesperson, Dr. Caroline Johnson.
Thank you, Mr Twigg, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. I'd like to congratulate the member for Liverpool West Derby for securing this important debate, and also to congratulate him for the work that he's done in raising funds for this important cause. And I'll be looking on YouTube later to see if I can find the honourable member, Mr McDonnell, playing his trombone, which I'm sure will be a great rendition. Losing a child is every parent's very worst nightmare. But every day, parents across the country are caring for children with life-limiting diseases. There are now 99,000 seriously ill children and their families in the UK. For those families, the children's hospices, as we've heard today, are a necessary lifeline. As an NHS consultant paediatrician, children's palliative care is an issue very close to my heart, and I have cared for many children with life-limiting illnesses. I've also been the person who's delivered that bad news and been there through families' journeys and also in those final moments. My role as a politician now gives me the opportunity to stand and advocate for those families and those children, and to use this platform as a vehicle for positive change to make the treatment and care for those children much better. And it is an opportunity I've taken before. I was pleased to hear the member for Bromsgrove and the honourable member for Aldridge Brownhills talk about Acorns Hospice, because in 2019 myself and the honourable member for Newcastle North were chairing together the Together for Short Lives APPG, and we heard of financial difficulties that were facing Acorns Children's Hospice and other hospices, and our campaign and an adjournment debate held in July 2019 led to an announcement from Minister at the time, Minister Dinage at the time, that the hospice grant will be doubled from 12,000 to 12 million to 25 million pounds, which certainly helped the hospices at that time. But time has moved on. Demand is increasing. There are more children affected, sadly. Those children are living longer, which means they need the services for a longer period, and the complexity of the care that these children require has increased. In fact, on average, children's hospices in England spent 15% more in 2023-24 compared to 21-22. And charities have raised money to fill the gap. But one of the things we've heard is that the charities find it more difficult to raise funds in some areas than others, depending on the relative affluence of the people who live in the area surrounding that hospice, not to their generosity, but simply to their means to provide that extra funding. And it's important that we ensure that all children have access, regardless of the area in which they live. There was progress made in the last Parliament improving access to palliative care for children, and as part of the Health and Care Act in 2022, the government added palliative care services to the services that must be commissioned by the ICB. And as part of that, £1.5 billion of extra funding was provided at national level to support ICBs with inflationary pressures. And they allocated a further 25 million in grant funding for the 2024-25 period. However, I think it's important to say that we still have an increasing demand, and we still need some more funding for going forward. And what we also need is certainty. Hospices can't plan from year to year. They need this government to give them the sort of certainty of financial support that they were given previously. And I am concerned about the budget this afternoon, because we have been briefed that national insurance contributions for employers will rise. We've also been briefed that the NHS direct employers will be protected, but that won't necessarily protect hospices and others who deliver healthcare services. And we'll be looking carefully at that this afternoon. As I said, the ICBs are now responsible for allocating funding for children's hospices. But Together for Short Lives have highlighted the variation in how that grant has been allocated by the ICBs. Some have paid the allocation in full, some are paying it quarterly, others have not paid at all. So I asked the Minister what steps is he going to take to hold the ICBs to account for allocating the grant and supporting hospices. And also, I recognise there is great value in the ICBs in providing local services, locally commissioned, to best target local services to the population they serve. but also there is a recognition that some services are a low volume, high complexity and are best commissioned nationally. And I'd urge the Minister to just consider carefully whether, in the case of children's hospices, which are certainly relatively low volume, high complexity services, whether that balance is right and whether it should be nationally commissioned. And in either case, it's wrong to hear that the statistics are not available to each ICB of how many children they need to care for, because without that you can't plan your funding. So I'd ask the Minister to see what he can do to ensure that he's got the right information to make the right decision. I also want to ask about the Children and Young People's Cancer Task Force, because many of the children with life-limiting conditions are children with cancer. It was set up earlier this year to drive improvements in how we detect, treat and care for children with cancer. What is the government going to put forward as an alternative to the Cancer Task Force that it's paused, and how quickly can we expect that to take place? I appreciate that it's very difficult for the Minister to make commitments when the budget is just a few hours away. But could he commit to reviewing the locations of children's hospices? There's a report that was produced by the APPG in conjunction with Together for Short Lives, including with Siobhan McDonagh, the member for Mitchell and Morden, demonstrated that some, because they've been set up often charitably, the locations are not always spread out evenly across the country, and some people in rural areas particularly find it very difficult to access a children's hospice. Given that we need to make sure that all children have this access, can he commit to at least looking at how he can make sure that everyone has access to children's hospice? And finally, can he restate the government's provision to short break provision? Because children's hospices provide excellent palliative care at the end of life, but they also, as we've heard today, provide significant care during life. And part of that is a short break respite care, which is so valuable to so many families. And can he commit to ensuring that his department will ensure that this is funded? Thank you.
Well, Minister.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Twigg, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. I'd really like to thank my honourable friend, the member for Liverpool West Derby, for securing this vitally important debate. I know that this sector, this community, is very close to his heart. And I'd like to thank him for all the work he's doing to support and raise awareness of the issue generally, but also in particular, of course, for the heroic work that he's been doing for Zoe's Place. I know that Zoe's Place is facing an uncertain future. However, I also know that my honourable friend is spearheading the fundraising campaign for the hospice and has been part of discussions with the trustees of Zoe's Place and builders regarding securing a new site for the hospice to ensure that it has a long-term future. I'd also like to say I'm very much aware of the work that the Liverpool-based Home Bargains is doing, and particularly the pledge for an incredible £2.5 million towards the campaign. So I really do wish both my honourable friend and the hospice every success in these vital endeavours, and I'd also like to pay tribute to Home Bargains for their outstanding community spirit. Thanks also to the many honourable members who've attended today and contributed so powerfully to this important debate. I think we heard some really excellent contributions, and I think honourable members have really stood up today and shown how important this issue is to this House. I'd like to thank as well all of the people who work in children's palliative and end of care, including hospices across the country, who provide such vital care and support to those who most need it. All of us here will recognise the importance of palliative and end-of-life care services, including hospices, which provide personalised care and support at the most difficult times for children and young people with complex needs and their families and carers. It's estimated that there are over 86,000 children and young people with life-limiting conditions in the UK. As we continue to make medical advances, this number is predicted to increase. Palliative and end-of-life care for children with life-limiting conditions is provided by a broad range of organisations and professionals across multiple settings, including in primary care, community care, in hospitals, in hospices, in educational settings, and in children's own homes. This system-wide approach of providing palliative and end-of-life care should be sufficient to ensure the local offer to patients is personalised, high quality and sustainable. Whilst the majority of palliative and end-of-life care is provided by NHS staff and services, we recognise the essential part that voluntary sector organisations, including hospices, also play in providing support to people at end of life and their loved ones. Children's hospices are a vital part of this system-wide approach, as they provide a wide range of health and care support to meet the physical, emotional, social and indeed spiritual needs of children, young people and their loved ones. Care is often provided by a multidisciplinary team and often alongside and in collaboration with statutory services, all working together to ensure the entire family is supported. The support provided by hospices can include practical advice and information, short breaks or respite, specialist therapies such as physiotherapy, art or play therapy, 24/7 end-of-life care and bereavement support. Short breaks are a key part of a range of provisions that support disabled children and their families. They can include the provision of day, overnight and weekend activities for children and young people and can take place in the child or young person's own home, the home of an approved carer, or in a residential or community setting. Local authorities have a statutory duty to assess the social care needs of disabled children and young people and to provide respite care where necessary. Where it is appropriate, local authorities can fund respite care provided by hospices, either as a short-term stay or as a service provided to the child or young person in the family home by the hospice team. Local authorities and ICBs regularly liaise to plan and commission the most appropriate package of respite care for the children and young people with life-limiting or life-threatening conditions in their area. The government does not monitor the use of social care for children with palliative and end-of-life care needs. However, local authorities are required to publish a local short breaks duty statement showing what services are available, how they're responding to the needs of local carers, and how they can be accessed, including any eligibility criteria. Local authorities must consider the needs of local parents and carers when preparing their statements and must review them on a regular basis. Palliative care services are included in the list of services an integrated care board must commission. This promotes a more consistent national approach and supports commissioners to prioritise palliative and end-of-life care locally. To support ICBs in this duty, NHS England has published statutory guidance and service specifications which include specific reference to ensuring that there is sufficient provision of specialist palliative care services, hospice beds and future financial sustainability. Most hospices are charitable, independent organisations which receive some statutory funding from the NHS. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Twick. Just on the point of ICBs, if the funding is to go through the ICBs, and I really hope the Minister will take account of the view of the sector, what assurance can he give us that the funding for the hospices, the children's hospices, will actually go to the children's hospices? I really fear, Mr. Twigg, that if we're not careful, we'll be almost pitting one healthcare sector or one charitable sector against another, and I don't think that's in anybody's interest.
I thank her for that intervention. She's absolutely right. Funding which is earmarked for palliative care must absolutely go to palliative care. The statutory guidance is from the NHS, and it's vitally important that we continue to liaise from the centre with the ICBs to ensure that the funding that's been allocated is going to where it needs to go. If she's aware of issues where that funding is not going where it should go, she should certainly make representations, and of course I'd be happy to receive a letter from her on that issue. So the amount of funding each charitable hospice receives varies both within and between ICB areas. This will vary depending on demand in that ICB area, but will also be dependent on the totality and type of palliative and end-of-life care provision from both NHS and non-NHS services, including charitable hospices, within each ICB area. There are inequalities in access to hospice services, especially for those living in rural or socio-economically deprived areas. This is why including hospices as part of a system-wide approach is so important. I also understand that charitable hospices place value in their independence and autonomy, which allows them the freedom to provide services beyond the statutory office, which is actually, I think, one of the wonderful parts of hospice care. This independence also gives a sense of shared purpose in which the community cares for the hospice, which in turn cares for the community and is something to be cherished. It's indicative of the compassion that is found in hospices and communities all over the country. In addition to ICB funding at a national level, NHS England has supported palliative and end-of-life care for children and young people through the Children and Young People's Hospice Grant, totalling £25 million in 23-24. While 23-24 marked the final year of the Children's Hospice Grant in its previous format, in 24-25, NHS England did continue to provide £25 million of funding for children and young people's hospices. A prevalence-based model is used for this funding, which supports the move away from a traditional model of bed-based funding, better reflecting population needs. In 24-25, for the first time, this funding was transacted by ICBs on behalf of NHS England, rather than being centrally administered. I am aware that the shift to an ICB transacted model for 24-25 has not been as smooth a transition as we certainly would have hoped in the department. We're working closely with NHS England to resolve any remaining issues to the 24-25 funding and also to learn from what didn't work so well this year. We, alongside NHS England, absolutely recognise the importance of sustainable funding for the palliative and end-of-life care sector, including hospices, and we will consider the future of the children's hospice funding in the context of budget discussions. I have absolutely heard the representations made today by honourable members across this chamber about the need for the government to maintain the £25 million grant, and I can assure honourable members that I am working very closely with NHS England to get this confirmed as a matter of urgency. Mr Twigg,
Thank the Minister for his speech. He talked about maintaining the grant, but does he recognise that members of this House have also raised the increasing costs that hospices are facing? And will he look not just to maintain the grant, but to increase it?
Minister. We're certainly looking at ensuring that the grant is sustainable and that the real terms financial input to the system is a real terms financial input. So we are certainly looking at all of these issues in the round. This is as a matter of urgency. I totally understand why the sector needs certainty, needs the stability. It is a very, very difficult time when you're not sure what's happening after this in-year position, and we totally recognise that. We're working on it urgently. Mr Twigg, the 2010s were a lost decade for our health and care services, which now too often are not there when we need them. This is also true for hospice care, where we see a postcode lottery for services across the country and variation in quality and access. Honourable members will know that we have committed to developing a 10-year plan to deliver an NHS and care system that's fit for the future by driving 3 shifts in the way that care and health services are delivered. We will be carefully considering policies, including those that impact children with palliative and end-of-life care needs, with input from the public, patients, health staff and our stakeholders as we develop the plan over the coming months. That engagement process was formally launched last week, and I would strongly encourage the sector, including hospice providers, service providers and their families, and indeed every parliamentarian in this room, to engage with that process. Please go on to nhs.change.uk and make your voice heard, as that will fully allow us to understand what is not working well as well as it should, and what the solutions are and where the opportunities are for the future. One of our 3 strategic shifts that our 10-year health plan will deliver is around the government's determination to shift more healthcare out of hospitals and into the community. Community health teams play a vital role in supporting children and young people with complex health and care needs to live as well as possible, providing proactive care and preventing exacerbations and hospital admissions where possible. This shift from hospital to community includes our commitment to roll out neighbourhood health services to ensure that patients and their families receive personalised care in the most appropriate setting in their community and indeed as close as possible to home. Palliative and end-of-life care services, including hospices, will have a major role to play in the fundamental shift from hospital to community and in shaping that shift. Additionally, the Department, through the National Institute for Health and Care Research, is investing £3 million in a new policy research unit in palliative and end-of-life care. This unit launched in January 2024 and will build the evidence base on all-age palliative and end-of-life care with a specific focus on inequalities. So in closing today, Mr Twigg, I'd like to thank once again my honourable friend, the member for Liverpool and West Derby, for securing this vitally important debate on children's hospice funding. And again to express my heartfelt thanks to all those who support children, young people and their loved ones when they need them most. Thank you.
Ian Burns to wind up.
Thanks, Chair. Look, it's been a real privilege today to listen to everybody and see the unanimous, I think, feeling that at the moment where we are now is not sustainable, it's not acceptable, and we don't want to see any more Zoe's places happen in constituencies across the country. So once again, I'd like to thank the House and everybody in here for doing what they've did. I'd like to thank the Minister for his responses and the Shadow Minister, and hopefully we can fix this solution moving forward, because I'll certainly be having conversations with the Chancellor on this as well. Thank you.
The question is that this House has considered funding for children's hospices. As many of our opinions say aye, of the contrary no. I think the ayes have it, the ayes have it. Order, order. Could we clear the room, please, for the next debate? Thank you. She's only going to take 10 minutes, so it's going to be quick.
So I hear, yeah.
Are you staying, Jim, or? Yeah, you're staying. Just